thank you for joining us today. Today we're having a great webinar around identity management for the modern workplace. Identity management on the surface isn't like the most exciting of topics, but it's really a critical component. Justin's going to argue with me, but I'll get there in
Yeah,
a
I
second.
think it's exciting, but that's
So
just me.
this is you. That's great. But identity management is really one of the core fundamental pieces of any kind of cybersecurity program. It becomes the thing that small, large businesses need. It's so critical. And anytime you maintain a system, or you need a way to identify users and then to prevent users from using it. So before we dive in, leave some introductions. My name is George Adderman. I'm the president of Valiant Technology. We're in New York. With Valiant's a New York-based MSP or managed service provider. We do IT for small, medium businesses particularly in the marketing communication space. And I'd like to introduce my co-panelists here. Next up is Justin Pincina. Justin is
So,
Valiant's CIO. Hey, Justin. And he's been a long-term member of the Valiant team. He's part of our thought leadership. He really develops all the solutions, and great person to work with. So next up is Marian Dobrovsky. Marian also is a long-term, she's our training manager, also a long-term member of Valiant. And she has a wide array of experience working from our account management team. And now she heads up our training division and does a lot of trainings for our customers. So really great. Just calling this understanding and bridging the gap between the really technical piece and the much more user-friendly side. Marian, thanks for coming.
Hey.
And next up, and last but not least, Megan Quick. Megan is part of our sales and marketing team. Megan's coming up on a year with Valiant, which is really exciting. It's been an exciting year, which is pretty hard to say. And just really gets involved in our just working with new customers and just in our initiatives as well. So with that, let's kick it off. Marianne, why don't you give us kind of a walkthrough of the really high level identity management?
Yeah, definitely. So identity management, as George mentioned, is essential. But the modern workplace can bring unique challenges to this, and ultimately, it of course, brings improvements and efficiencies, which we will talk about later. But I I don't want to get too deep into defining what the modern workplace is. You can see we had a previous webinar where we actually went a deep dive into that. So if you are interested, check that out. But I do want to talk about how it affects identity management. So the modern workplace is a lot more mobile. People are working from anywhere, or even if they are centrally located in an office, they're still working on multiple devices while they're on the go, while they're at clients. So it's a lot harder to really just rely on perimeter security or keeping like your local network secure. So that's something that we're looking into, why identity management is so important. There's also a lot of applications are moving to the cloud, so they can be accessible from anywhere. And you also are able to have increased collaboration across departments, across companies, and across locations. I mean, look at all of us. We are all coordinating together on this webinar from different states, different counties. So it's really cool, but it also can lead to some issues where you have to make sure that the right people are doing the right thing. So that's where identity management becomes a key player. Let's talk a little bit about defining it. Identity management is basically a process for identifying, authenticating, and authorizing individuals, or you can have groups of people to provide secure access for technology resources. So those resources could be physical, like equipment, hardware, a computer, or they could be something like an application, a database, or a program. But it also can just be data or information. I know a lot of people have used SharePoint or Google Drive and can have that stuff located someplace that's not the traditional server anymore. And that's huge. So it's really important to be able to identify that when someone is getting access to that you can authenticate it's the right person. And make sure you can set for that individual or that group of people that they can access the information, or they can perform actions only what you want them to be able to do and be able to see. So this can be kind of hard to visualize, and I'm going to have Justin to run through the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about with the pure identity model.
Sure. Thanks, Marianne. Yeah, the pure identity models, we're going to take a look at that right now, which really shows how identity management works in a nutshell. Identities are things that we use to represent objects and stuff that exist in the real world. We call those things entities, and you could think of that as, a person, a computer, like Marianne said. So I'm an entity. The identity is the way that the digital component of that, the digital footprint of that, that has what's called attributes. And attributes are anything that's associated with that identity, things that it's allowed to do, that it's not allowed to do. So, for example, you could think of your account that you use to log into Gmail. You log into your account in Gmail, and your account in Gmail has access to your inbox. That's you have the attributes that let you get access to that. Now, this is a little abstract, a little high level sometimes. So I like to think of it as a real world analogy of going to the store and buying a six pack. I'm the user. I'm going to walk into the store. I'm going to pick up the object that I want, in this case, the six pack, bring it up to the counter. That gets scanned with the UPC code. That UPC code is the identity of that object that has a setting, an attribute in the register system that says, well, you have to be 21 to buy this. Now, the clerk says to me, hey, I need to see your driver's license. That driver's license is my identity that I'm showing that, I'm me. The driver license is the identity, and it has attributes on it, two of them. One of them is the picture, so that he can verify that it is in fact me. And the other one is the date of birth, that he could look at and say, okay, you're 21, you're authorized to make this purchase, and then I can complete the transaction and be on my way. So we use identity like that in a lot of ways where we don't really see it, and do bring that into the modern workplace in a bunch of different ways. I do want to go back a little bit into something that we've gone over in a few other series, which is the CIA triad, and show how that identity management is central to all three pillars of the CIA triad. Confidentiality. Obviously, identity is important here because in order to ensure that only the people that are supposed to be viewing content or have access to that content are the ones viewing it, you have to be able to identify them in a strong way. Integrity also relies on the identity management because in order to keep a really strong audit log of what changes have been made, you need to know who has made those changes so that you can verify whether or not they're supposed to have been made. And you need to be able to tie the identity to those actions in order to do that. And lastly, availability. This is also critical to have a strong identity management policy that works with this, because not only do you need to be able to have somebody be able to give their identity, but you also don't want to make that process so onerous that they can't do it, or that it's hard for them to get access to the things that they need. So you need to be able to easily authenticate, have your identity, to have access to that data that's there. And while we're going to talk a lot about modern workplace and how these things apply to cloud services, I think it's important for us to really know that identity management has been a central part of security for quite a while. And I believe George has some really good information about the history of
Yeah.
identity management.
Yep. Thanks, Justin. I think it's really important. Just to remind you that always you want to look how things evolve, where they come from. So, there's always been different schemes and different processes and mechanisms to authenticate users, but it really got centralized in in mid '80s with a product called with a set of protocols called X500, particularly one called DAP, which is Directory Access Protocol. And before that, many systems had disparate logins, and you had to have databases of users, and you have kind of maintain very different levels for each application. And we still see that kind of fractured approach, and we're working on trying to stop that or relieve that. But X500 and Adapt in particular really was the first step in it, but it was really hard, right? It was a big international standard. It was really hard to implement. So in 1993, the standard got much more streamlined and was called LDAP. It was more of a TCP/IP protocol. It was easier to implement. It had some really simplified mechanisms, and it became the standard for non-Windows systems. There was Novell and a couple other ones out there. Sun Microsystems. But in 1986, 1996, when NT4, there was a release called NTDS. But NTDS also had problems. It wasn't scalable. You relied on a thing called the SAM, which was very easily to be hacked. It didn't allow applications to really connect to it correctly or as easily as later LDAP applications did. And Microsoft kind of recognized that. So they built a product called Active Directory, which almost every single person you'll ever meet that works in a corporate world has an Active Directory account somewhere. Or you may not even know you have an Active Directory account, but you have one, I assure you. It's pretty pervasive. And it started in 1999 with Windows 2000, and it was a kind of a very strong but gradual implementation and adoption across the Microsoft ecosystems and many enterprises. And it became kind of a de facto standard in many ways because because it had also LDAP attributes, it could interoperate. In 2015, when Microsoft really drove the innovation through Azure, they built a new product called Azure AD, which is really what our kind of modern standard that we want to really focus our energies on, because we think that's going to be the tool that's most used to allow the kind of modern workplace and have a more modern identity management structure. After this is a little bit about Azure Active Directory. It extends the Active Directory attributes from normal on-premise Active Directory, which is really important. And it's also allowed to be a standalone solution. And what it does, it's cloud-based, it's hyper redundant. It uses the kind of power and scale, the hyperscale of the Azure solution, and it can do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do, like really quickly add in applications and SSO and authentication mechanisms. I think Justin has some really great kind of technical deep dive on it, and why we really think it's the kind of future for almost all of our customers, or many customers at least, to have as a centralized identity solution. Thanks, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with it being the hyperscale is what allows it to do a lot of these very cool things, uh, including being able to leverage just the data that Microsoft has to monitor what's going on and protect against all different kinds of breaches. There's a lot of features within Azure AD that you can enable that'll do things like check to see where you're logging in from and compare that to where you logged in from a few minutes ago. So if you logged in from New York and then 2 minutes later you log in from California and then 2 minutes later you log in from China, the system can look at that and say, well, you can't travel that distance in that time, something is going on, and enact certain policies. Or do things like check against what's called a password spray attack, where someone is using a brute force tool to just try all kinds of different remembered passwords or username and password combinations, and the system can see that that's happening and either put up an MFA challenge or block the login or send an alert, depending on how you've configured it. And yeah, like you mentioned, it really is the scalability of the system that allows this to really function in a way that regular Active Directory just can't. Azure AD sees 18 billion login attempts every day, and 300 million of those are related to malicious activity, and that's across over 800 million different accounts. And when you think about your in-house domain controller, you maybe have 200, 300 accounts, and you're keeping track of your users. This is a lot bigger pool of data, a much larger pool of data that Microsoft can draw on to build these security policies. It also then enables you to really take the first steps towards deploying zero trust. And gonna give a quick run through of what zero trust really is. In the past, the way we've thought of security is perimeter security, where you have a gateway. Anything on the inside is considered good, and anything on the outside is suspect. But once it makes it inside, it's good. And you could think of airport security. You're go through the security checkpoint at the airport, and after that, you could do whatever you want because they've checked you out and you're fine. Zero trust is really the next level of that, because this perimeter doesn't work in the modern workplace. There is no perimeter anymore. As Marianne said, we're in different states and different counties and different cities just to put this webinar together. So how do we protect our data and our access if the perimeter is gone? Well, what you do is you treat every attempt to access the system as if it's a potential breach. You make sure that you always have an explicit verification that you are logging into something and that it's you're supposed to be there. Just because I'm in the network doesn't mean that it's a good connection, or that I should just be trusted. I still have to verify every time. You also make sure that you give the least privileged access, which means that if I'm trying to do something and I need more permissions than I have right now, but I don't need full admin permissions, just give the account the permissions it needs to do the thing that it's doing. Don't elevate it beyond that. That way, if it is a breach, it's still contained into a very specific area. And lastly, and most importantly, you always assume that everything is a breach until you prove otherwise, not the other way around. If I'm going to log into an account, the system needs to assume that my login is malicious until it verifies that, okay, no, this is actually good. We verified that this is a good login because the user is coming from a known location and used their MFA and entered the correct password and meets all these other criteria. So all of that starts you on the path to building this zero trust security environment that not only is much more secure than doing a traditional perimeter environment, but it also lets you do a lot of other cool stuff, get a lot of additional benefits. And I think Marianne has more info to walk us through some of the benefits that you can get from having like a real zero trust and a really strong identity management system.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. One of the things that's really great about this modern identity management is that it does allow you to sort of innovate your processes and do different things that are really powerful. So I want to first start with secure collaboration with other businesses. This is where you have a trusted vendor or maybe a client, and you can use these principles of identity and authorization to grant them access to some of your tools or a set of files or applications, and then your partners and you can collaborate on them, or even just have the most up-to-date information. So for example, you could share a SharePoint site with all of the files within it to your client, and then as you edit files or as you add new ones, they're going to always be able to access those the most up-to-date files, and you can have those updates without having any sort of risk of a bad actor stumbling upon them. It's really secure just to whoever you specifically share it to, and they can only do specifically what you allow them to do. So let's talk a little bit about when you do modernize your identity, and you can take the existing structure. We talked more about how Active Directory has been around for decades, but you can make it more scalable to your modern workplace needs. With Azure AD as a cloud-based Active Directory, you can expand beyond just your local network, and you can bring that into cloud services that you have and applications, and that can end up leading to a much more centralized security solution as well, which I'm actually going to have Megan talk a little bit more about what that might look like.
Yeah, thank you, Marianne. Yeah, the centralized security that Azure AD allows is good news for administrative purposes. On the Microsoft website that I looked at while I was doing research, it states that Azure AD is your universal platform to manage and secure identities, which underlines secure. And actually, what George went into earlier in the webinar, there's actually a parallel between the rise of LDAP and the rise of Azure AD. Before X500 and LDAP, each server and computer had its own database and users and permissions. LDAP centralized that to a single identity system, which made it so much easier and user-friendly. Now, each cloud service has its own database of users and permissions and needs to be managed and maintained. So when you use Azure AD with these cloud services, you can have a single source of truth, which sounds like something from Lord of the Rings. I really like it. And you have the single source of truth to access everything that your organization uses. So the way I contextualize this as someone who's more of a tech outsider, you say you're onboarding a new client, or sorry, you're onboarding a new employee, and you need to put all their credentials in one place. With Azure AD, there's a central location where you can enter all the credentials that will allow them to access on-prem things like printers or office machines they need to use, and cloud applications like CRMs, payment portals. Also, according to Microsoft, Azure AD supports over 2,800 pre-integrated software as a service applications. So this is just a really important tool to have in your arsenal if you're a business. And like anything else, centralized security usually means, or it does mean, stronger security. Your business can then just focus on unlocking the full potential of your applications and security systems because you know your identity management is taken care of. And that, like the slide says, we zoom out, the broader picture, the why of all of this, it's improved IT governance. IT governance is concerned about optimizing your IT so that your company can operate at maximum efficiency, right? And identity management is vital to the protection of your applications and devices, and most importantly, your users. So strong IT governance means protecting employees from themselves sometimes. I personally am very happy that I have to really try to mess things up and that I don't have permissions to go places that I shouldn't go, and I don't want to mess up, honestly. And it's more, yeah, it's more important than ever also to keep your IT governance sharp, because as we've reiterated again and again in this webinar, we are all at disparate locations right now. Perimeter security is not the reality anymore, and it's not enough to keep your business secure. So that awareness and strengthening your identity management helps you minimize the threats from bad actors that could really derail your business and that you might not come back from. And then we go to my favorite part of everything, the seamless user experience. As a sales associate, I like to be able to tell people this is going to make your life easier. So it helps you do a better job. Single sign-on makes it very simple to access your applications that you need to do your job effectively, and you don't have to keep track of like all the different passwords for every application to get in. You just sign in one place. And the self-service password resets, you can regain control of your access to your account in the same amount of time it might have taken you to submit a ticket to your IT. So just simply saying, it really empowers the user to feel like they are more in control of their applications and the tools they need to do their job. And a happy user usually does correlate with a more productive employee, I have to say.
Yeah.
And George, I'll pass it back to you.
Super. Thanks, Megan. All really good points, and it's kind of put all together into like one thing. Without this layer of identity management, without a layer of control over it, and it's not something a control for control's sake, but more like make it a great experience for any user. This technology pervades like all aspects of our lives at this point, and especially our business life. With the amount of remote work we're doing, the fact that the perimeter security is no longer a valid place to operate from, and we really want and advantage of cloud. So to take advantage of these new tools, we really need to have a better way to protect them, and it starts with like this: not allowing people in or systems in that are not authorized to do so. So identity management is like the kind of like the core first step in terms of a greater and broader kind of update to our solutions that we're putting out. Is, you know, what we did in the past doesn't really work anymore, and this is where we have to start at the fundamentals. And fundamentally, if we don't have to know who's allowed to do what, when, and at what time, it's a real problem. So with that, you know, using Azure AD as our core single source of truth, this sounds cool to say, and it's a really good saying. But it really means like we know who's working on our systems and when, and that's what we want to achieve. So with that, just to wrap it all up in a saying, we put together a huge amount of resources that we always, because we think that the more information you have, the better informed you can be, the better decisions you can make. IT's hard. Cybersecurity is the even hardest part of IT, I think. So please check out our blog, knowledge base. We do a live stream weekly every Thursday at 10:30. Unless there's a day we're doing a webinar, which is a little more formalized. But the live streams have tons of content in them. They're so topical to questions you may have. We may answer a lot of questions there. We have a remote work center in case you have questions on that. A ton of downloadables and recorded webinar ranging from NIST standards to a breach response guide, all things that can get your business in a better spot so you can be better prepared for any kind of eventuality or issues that might come up concerning especially cybersecurity and better workflows in the modern workplace. So with that, we have a special cybersecurity health check working in conjunction with our partner Scout. They're a great cybersecurity team. We love working with them. And basically, please just contact Megan. Her email address is right there. We'll schedule some time with us. We go through your cybersecurity posture, and we give you a report and some recommendations of what we think. It's very high level, but it's really a great place to start and understand where you may be falling a little short or things that can be improved. With that, I want to say thanks, everyone. Megan, Justin, Marianne, thank you so much for really participating with us. I always look forward to doing these with you all the time. I think it's really fun. If you'd like to download the presentation, it's right here at this link. If you have questions for our team, any thoughts, or any live stream topics, it can be anything from, hey, how do I prepare for the new year? Or how do I how do I get MFA on my device? Ask us questions. We love answering questions. We do them on our live streams. So usually we do a webinar, but we're actually putting our webinar in November on pause. We're doing a live stream that same day, because we're doing a little bit more robust end of year kind of summation in December. So please stay tuned. Check out our channels on YouTube, LinkedIn, our website. We'll have some more information on it. We're really excited to put it together. And that's it for today. Thank you, everyone, for so much for your participation. All right.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
all.
you. Thank you, Matt, as
Thank
well, for
you.
producing everything. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Bye
Thanks,
now.
everybody.